Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining from. I'm Reena Dayal, and I'm your host for the Thought Integrator podcast series, the series that brings you the latest in science and technology in a language that everybody can understand. Every other week, we have some renowned expert from a science or technology field, and we have a conversation around that, around the expertise of the person that we invite. And today's discussion is on quantum biology. You know what? I always have been born and brought up in India, studied in schools influenced by the British, and now most of my adult life having worked with American in an American company. And I always struggle with whether I should say biology or biology. Right? But whatever, quantum biology. And it's a subject which is very, very fascinating, primarily because for a long time it was ignored. And, it's now coming into its own. And so we're going to have a very interesting discussion. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Clarice D Aiello. And just to give you a little bit of a background about Clarice, she received her Ph.D. from MIT in electrical engineering and held post-doctoral appointments in bioengineering at Stanford and in chemistry at Berkeley. She joined UCLA in November 2019. Maybe not such a good time to start if you're in the business of building experiments. In her own words, I've heard her say that. And she, in her own words, she's a quantum engineer who's interested in how quantum physics informs bio. She's working at the cusp of physics and biology, and she's the principal investigator at the Quantum Biology Tech Qubit Lab at UCLA. So welcome, Clarice. I'm really looking forward to our discussion. Let's start by talking a little bit about you. So who is Clarice D Aiello? Apart from the roles that I just described, who is Clarice?
So first of all, thank you, Reena. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm thrilled to see and talk to you again. And thanks for having a podcast on quantum bio. So maybe the first thing that you need to know is that this accent comes from Brazil. I was born and raised in Brazil. I went to Europe to do my undergraduate and my master's, and then I crossed the Atlantic back again to do my PhD and postdocs in the US, where I am currently. And I like to call myself a quantum engineer. This means that I build apparatuses to study and control things that are so small and so well protected from their environment that they're better described by the laws of quantum mechanics, as opposed to the laws of classical mechanics that rule everything big around us. So I'm an instrument builder, right? And one thing that I need to do, one thing that I thought your audience might like to know is that I am trained in the field that is known as quantum sensing. So it can be proven mathematically that if you use a quantum object, say one electron, as a sensor, your measurement is improved. In other words, the sensor quantumness enhances the measurement. So in my past, I worked towards developing quantum enhanced technological quantum sensors, right? Magnetic field sensors, electric field sensors, temperature sensors. But since then, my focus has shifted a bit because there's actually incomplete, but nevertheless a lot of evidence that quantum things in biological matter might be using the same quantum strategies that technological quantum sensors are using in order to interact with their environment, right? So
very fascinating, and we'll come to that. But I wanted to ask you a question. What fascinated you about quantum biology, and how did you, decide at the time when you were studying? Did people deter you from the subjects that you decided to choose? And, what made you decide on this subject?
Oh, it was just serendipity, right? So as you, so first of all, quantum biology wasn't in my radar at all. I was a technological quantum sensing person and so forth. but so again, serendipity. After my PhD, I didn't know quite what I wanted to do with my life, and I didn't have a plan. So I was like, oh, maybe I should do a postdoc onto something more veering towards biology because that's different. And to cut a long story short, I was working towards trying to image something in chlorophyll, which is the thing that makes photosynthesis go, right? But the chlorophyll sample was not working. So I was trying to find another sample that might work using the same imaging method that it's really not important, but I found by chance this other molecule that could replace chlorophyll, and I started reading more and more about this replacement molecule, and this molecule turned out to be cryptochrome. If you have heard about the poster children like examples of quantum biology, cryptochrome is part of spin quantum biology, which is like how nature might be using the quantum property of spin in order to function. And I can talk about that a little bit later too, but to cut a long story short, I found this molecule by chance. I started reading about this and I realized that it had a lot to do. It was just a biological manifestation, if you will, of the same type of quantum processes that I was used to dealing with. So from that time onwards, I started reading more and decided to bet my career into developing actually instruments that can push the field of quantum biology forward.
So when you decided to do that, quantum biology was not very popular as a subject, right? And one could say that the area was given a step brotherly or step sisterly treatment, whatever you want to call it. So how did you feel, and what was your conviction about continuing? Of course, you just described something, but I'm sure everybody would love to hear more about your conviction in this space and what did you face?
Oh, I'm still facing it, right? So quantum biology is really in like no man's land. It sits at the border of biology, chemistry, physics, and it's definitely not a mainstream subject. Right now, I would say that there is no absolutely conclusive proof that nature might be using the laws of quantum mechanics to function. There is very good evidence, and we're working towards like establishing these proofs, but in a couple of years. So quantum biology has a bad rep. So for example, if I Google quantum biology, hit number 13 in my computer is something like quantum healing. So quantum biology has been to some extent hijacked by like new agey things, and it's important to say what we mean by quantum biology. So quantum biology is the serious study of whether nature might be harnessing weird properties of quantum mechanics in order to function. And again, physicists are more used to thinking about technological quantum systems. Biologists say, well, we've been doing things chemically for like decades. Why do we need quantum things now, right? So I still face a lot of, how can I say it? It's still a hard space to be working in. And traditionally, it's a field that is quite older, it's aging, in that many people pivot to doing quantum biology like experiments at the second half, the last third of their career, when they are established, when they have like a continuous stream of funding coming. So there is right now very little incentive for bringing young blood into the game, right? So, and again, at the peril of sharing too much information, the reason why I decided to have a career in quantum biology is basically because I don't have kids. Because if I had kids, if I had a family to take care of, I am not sure I would take this risk, because there's very little established pots of money that go to quantum biology in the United States. The two main national grant-giving agencies, the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health, they're just starting to have a look at quantum bio. So it's not something that is mainstream yet. And again, I wear many hats. One of the hats I wear is trying to push quantum biology forward. It's a lot of educational effort in the best sense of the word. That I talk to a lot of people trying to explain what we mean, what we don't mean by quantum bio. But it's a hard space to work in.
Yeah, I can see that, and hats off to your passion for this space, because it's people like you who have and will continue the efforts in this space. And very often, when the space becomes popular, then everybody jumps in. But really, every space in science or technology evolves because of the efforts of the first few people who have confidence in it. And I hope people realize the kind of efforts that are going in here. And just to just so that the audience understands this a bit better, who are the people? What would you say worldwide? Which are the key locations where research is happening in quantum biology right now?
First of all, again, it's a field that it's at the intersection of chemistry, biology, and physics. Before I talk about locations, I would like to describe a little bit to at least mention some of the ways that nature might be using quantum mechanics to function. Absolutely. And then I can talk about key players. So one of the first places that people started looking for quantum phenomena was in the broad field of photosynthesis, right? Photosynthesis is an incredibly efficient phenomenon whereby the plant captures energy from the sun and transfers this energy in a very, very good way towards making energy for the cells, right? And there are people, because this process is so efficient and incredibly more efficient than, say, humankind-made solar cells, people have been trying to see whether some special quantumness is at play in that phenomenon, and apparently it may have to do with quantum. The other part where people look for quantumness has to do with the sensing of magnetic fields, in the interaction of organisms with magnetic fields, and that is where I work, basically. So it turns out that it's been known in chemistry that there are some chemical reactions that depend on quantum parameters, right? And it seems that it's this kind of quantum-dependent chemical reactions that might be at play, for example, when birds migrate. So there is absolutely no doubt, it has been known for decades, that birds and butterflies, and actually turtles, for example, when they migrate, they, at least as a partial cue, use the magnetic field of the Earth. The magnetic field of the Earth is crazily small. It's smaller than the magnetic field that you sense when you put your cell phone close to your face. So how might birds be using this information? And right now, the only standing theory on how they're doing this is by taking advantage of a quantum phenomena that happens like within a chemical reaction in the eye of the bird. It's really not important. So interaction with magnetic fields is one flavor of quantum biology. And the cool thing is that even though bird migration is, again, the poster child of this flavor of quantum biology, there are many other important biological phenomena that, again, there's a lot of evidence, incomplete evidence, but evidence that other phenomena depend on magnetic fields in a way that is consistent with a quantum property mediating this interaction. Metabolic processes, cell regeneration processes, DNA repair process. So all those processes seem to depend on interactions with weak magnetic fields in biology mediated by a quantum property of the electrons called spin. Again, not important. Another example of quantum biology flavor is it's a bit controversial still, but it has to do with olfaction. So the main model to understand olfaction is you have some sort of lock and key mechanism, right? You have a molecule, and you have like the molecule that the person, like someone is going to smell, and there's something that hooks up the receptor to the molecule, and then the person like can interact with that odor or with that molecule, right? Someone proposed that in addition to this lock and key mechanism, there is a vibrational thing involved, and those vibrations are quantum-like vibrations, and so if that proves true, it would mean that things such as olfaction might depend on quantum mechanics to function. And again, the cool thing about this is that the type of receptor that is involved in olfaction is also super widespread for other things as well, which brings us to the question of, if that works in olfaction, might that work for other biological processes as well? So just there, I gave you 3 examples of quantum mechanics, of potential examples of quantum biology: photosynthesis, organismal interaction with magnetic fields, and olfaction. Right now, the players in this space, actually the US is a bit behind. People in Europe, for example, are much more, for a while, Europe has been a much more welcoming environment to quantum biologists. So there is one doctoral program on quantum biology at the University of Surrey, which is the only doctoral program, like the official training program for people who want to go into quantum biology. In England, there are many people working in photosynthesis, in organismal interaction with magnetic fields. In Japan, there's a lot of spin-like quantum biology being done. In the US, there are many people thinking about photosynthetic processes in relationship with quantum things. So those might be it's a bit generic as an answer, but there are people doing quantum biology in many places in the world. I think that the problem is that there isn't a community or a very strong community. As I said, if you want to really be trained in quantum biology, there's one doctoral training program, right? And also there's the question of the curriculum. Like, what should someone who wants to become a quantum biology, what should they learn, right? How should they be trained? And right now, there aren't many formal mechanisms towards that. So that's something that I think about a lot. So 10 years ago, there weren't any bioinformatics departments. What should we be doing now for us to have a quantum biology department in 10 to 20 years? So how can we get there? So those are things that are also in the back of my mind.
Yeah, sure. So, especially because it is at the cusp of 3 subjects. So when you do a doctorate, how do you specialize? And whether you have the emphasis and focus more on the physics side or the biology, and what is the kind of background that will get you to that stage also, right? I mean, that's also, you could come from physics and then bring in a bit of biology, or come from biology and bring in physics. That sounds difficult to do, actually. But
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think it's equally difficult for me to grasp the biology as it is from someone from biology to grasp the physics. I really think so.
Mhm.
So actually, like the fact that I work with an interdisciplinary team, the fact that I am always learning, because as you mentioned, nobody is an expert in all those disciplines at present, right?
Mhm.
I like this a lot because you're always learning.
Mhm.
It's very daunting, right? Beyond high school, I've never taken any bio class, to be honest. Um, but I think that everyone has something different to contribute. For example, I think that with my technical training, I can contribute with building better instruments, better setups, right? Better instruments to probe biology quantum mechanically. And in the same way that people with a biological background might bring genetics proficiency or other things. So I think everyone has to contribute, and it's really like how to bring the best of those disciplines. Like how do we mingle those disciplines together in a way that makes sense?
Right. No, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. And in some senses, you are the perfect person to be on this podcast because you are that thought integrator, right? In that sense that you have depth in one area and you're sort of working with a multidisciplinary team and, sort of gaining a little bit of depth in each of those areas for you to be able to actually connect all the pieces together. Yeah.
But again, it's a choice, right? I like to do things broad. Some people like to do things deep. It's a
Right.
personal preference too, I think.
It is a preference, but I'm getting convinced that more and more as we look at different topics on the science and technology side, the interplay of multiple disciplines is becoming more and more prominent. So we need
Yes.
more people who want to go broad, even though they may have depth in one area, right? So I think
Oh, I think so too. I don't need to be convinced. Let me just say, like, open a tiny parenthesis. It's very hard currently, and that's not only a quantum bio problem issue. It's very hard to do true interdisciplinary science, right?
Mhm.
For example, for better or for worse, we're all siloed in departments, right? When I applied for faculty positions, I needed to choose to which departments to apply. Some funding agencies are not very good at funding interdisciplinary projects. For example, sometimes if you submit an interdisciplinary process to a National Science Foundation call, if your proposal really has to do with two different things, it might go through two different review panels. So it's like the multiplication of small probabilities, right? So you have to please both panels to get funded, and it gets harder and harder. So
Right. Yeah, so
it's
we
hard.
need actually people like you on the panels, right? Making those decisions.
It's going to take some time, and I need these people now to be making the decisions for me because I need this funding now too. So
Right. No,
it's
I
a hard
totally
space to.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a message for the decision makers that for
Yes.
interdisciplinary areas when you decide how funding has to happen, how do
Yep.
you formulate the right team and the right mechanism for actually evaluation so that things
Yeah.
don't fall through the cracks, so to say, and you keep funding the same kind of stuff because it's
Yeah.
well known, well established, and everybody's it's least risk for the people who are evaluating to take a bet on that, right? Whereas
Yeah.
new areas which are more complex, more multidisciplinary, it's
And,
basically decision makers taking a bet on that, right? So take
and
the risk. Yeah.
uh, totally, and also it has to do with the funding paradigm right now. So I actually have heard in 3 different interviews 3 Nobel Prize winners saying, well, I would not have been able to do the research that gave me the Nobel Prize under today's funding conditions,
Okay.
right? Because they claim that today uh, there's much more focus on what you can deliver within like 3 years, or right. So it's very hard to do. It's not curiosity driven science, but it's very hard to to go, as you said, beyond the boundaries of what's already being funded.
And we all know, right? If you have something which has a direct linkage to defense, you will get it funded immediately, right? And if it is it's something that is going to progress science, then you start thinking, who's going to benefit from it. And if that's not very clear at this stage, then it becomes a lot harder for funding to happen. So I think there's a note for policymakers here, and I run a think tank myself, and it's a good note for me to make to myself, is that when we make recommendations to how funding should be distributed, there should be a very clear amount which should be set aside for this long-term curiosity satisfaction and things that will drive our future in the longer term, right? Because if you don't make progress in these new areas now, there's no way you will actually come up with applications and things which are going to benefit humanity in the longer term. So I think that was a great, those are great insights, and thank you for that. I would like to come back a little bit on the, you talked about the historical use cases, and you also mentioned that your work is focused a lot more on the sensor side, right? In terms of how there could be biological sensors, and I think I got that in a previous conversation that we had. Could you expand that a little bit more? Explain the concept of sensors on the biology side, and what and the correlation to the quantum sensors on the physics side, and then come to the part as to exactly what you're trying to do.
Yes. So as I think I mentioned in the beginning of this call, you can prove that if you use a quantum object as a sensor, you can have a better measurement result than if you were using a classical big sensor, right? So, for example, in my past, I put a single electron spin in diamond, in the material diamond, to work at room temperature as, for example, a magnetic field sensor. So let me talk a little bit about spin. Spin is a fundamental property of matter, and it's as fundamental as charge and mass. Spins, the quantum property of spin measures how well a particle interacts with magnetic fields. So physicists and engineers and chemists usually depict spin with an arrow. I'm holding a paper arrow now, and spin up or spin down, the arrow pointing up or the arrow pointing down, signify different energy levels of this quantum property called spin. Okay, so there are different ways that, for example, electrons have spin, atomic nuclei have spin, and those, depending on the state of this spin property, you can have different energies associated with it. Okay, so in my past, I put a single electronic spin to work as a quantum enhanced sensor. Now, there's evidence that electron spin sensors are also at play in biological settings. And here's how this works, or is hoped that it works. I think I also mentioned that there are some chemical reactions that have been known for decades to depend on quantumness, and that's how it goes. There are chemical reactions that are spin dependent. So there's a chemical reaction happening, and at some point, the chemical reaction comes to an injunction. And at this injunction, depending on the electronic spin state of a certain electron, if the spin, say, is up, the chemical reaction continues through one branch. If the spin is, say, down, this property has the down energy, the chemical reaction continues through another branch. Importantly, the macroscopic final products of those two branches are different. Okay, and electron spins interact with magnetic fields, and actually magnetic fields can alter if a spin is up or down. So the interaction of electrons special kinds of electrons. The interactions of electrons with an external magnetic field, which is what I call sensing an external magnetic field, might influence macroscopically the outcome of a chemical reaction, right? Because it can influence if this one pathway of the chemical reaction is taken or the other pathway of the chemical reaction is taken. So it can influence things macroscopically and at much longer time scales. Even if the interaction with the electron spin with the magnetic field is very, very short, the consequences are macroscopic and at much longer time scales because it all comes downstream. So it's in this sense that electrons inside proteins, inside cells, inside organisms might be interacting with magnetic fields. And that's exactly what we study. As I also mentioned, the evidence for this phenomenon is incomplete, right? For example, the evidence exists at the chemical length scales. For example, electrons within proteins in solutions in a vial, there's no doubt that they are behaving as a quantum sensor in a vial, right? But then again, the next step in the evidence that exists are experiments done with like whole birds, whole flies, plates of like thousands of cells, and there's nothing in between, right? And it's very hard to say, well, the bird is doing its thing and knowing exactly where to go during winter because there's a quantum thing happening inside it. So what we're trying to do is sort of bridge those two length scales. We want to be doing experiments to establish or refute that electrons within proteins, within, say, a cell, behave quantum mechanically. So we're taking a bottom-up approach instead of going to birds. So we're going to like a single cell, at some point a little bit more cells, but we want to start very small, right? So what we do then to look at this phenomena is to build glorified microscopes with coils. So the coils are there to produce magnetic fields that can, in principle, influence the spins that influence chemical reactions. And the microscopes, they don't look like the microscope that you look into, like like when you're looking at like a biopsy, for example. They look like an optical table, a big table with plenty of mirrors and electronics around, but they are serving as microscopes, as windows into cells, basically. So it's the bare bones. It's microscopes with coils, and we want to see at the nanoscale whether quantum things happen in like the smallest model of a living stuff, say a cell.
Wow. So, while this will help us understand how certain biological systems work, how will it help us, so if you look at all the efforts that are going into quantum right now are in the quantum computing space, because that has great promises for, how we can, solve bigger and better problems. Now, how will this work that you're doing, I remember you telling me about it, and therefore I'm asking that question, how will this help the computing space in the long run?
Yes, and if you allow me, I really do need to make a parenthesis here, because I think that quantum biology is now where maybe quantum computing was 30 years ago, in that it all started with a lot of theory, Shor's algorithm, right? There was no physical implementation of that. Then some groups, like 5 groups around the world, trying to start implementing simple gates among quantum objects. When that worked, things exploded, and now we have this booming quantum industry. So I hope quantum biology might be on the same track. We just need those first conclusive experiments for traction to start, I hope. So parenthesis closed. I think that quantum biology may help both technologically and also for the biosciences. Let's talk about how I think technologically things can help. So I'm not saying, well, let's replace Google's beautiful quantum computer with a molecule, but rather, if nature is indeed using quantum mechanics to function, it has certainly developed strategies to deal with noise, right? Everything that starts quantum dies classical, and that's why we live in a big classical world. When quantum things start interacting even among themselves, they sort of push everyone down towards classicality. And if nature is using quantum mechanics, decoherence, yes, yes. I was avoiding the use of this word, but yes, the degree of quantumness in an object is measured by the time during which it's well described by the laws of quantum mechanics, and this duration of time is known as coherence times. And after this time, things are pushed back to classicality, and if people have heard this word, things decohere, right? The quantum object decoheres, and if nature is using quantum mechanics to function, it's very likely that it found a way to work for long enough at high temperatures, which is high temperatures are something that causes a lot of fast decoherence, right? So nature probably knows how to deal with noise. So I wonder if there isn't a way of us, again, not replacing quantum computing architectures with biological things, but just looking at the ways that nature is protecting itself from the coherence in those processes and apply the same sort of strategy onto existing quantum mechanical architectures. That's one space that I think quantum biology might be interesting for technology. The other thing is, again, right now, this is science fiction, but I truly believe that not in 5 or 10 years, but in 50 years, we might get there. So if there are those endogenous quantum knobs, those endogenous quantum mechanical degrees of freedom in nature, can we tune them in a way that we can deterministically influence the way things are evolving? For example, I told you that there are chemical reactions that depend on the quantum property of electrons, which is the spin. Can we start tuning, like applying crafted magnetic fields to talk to those spins so that we sort of drive chemical reactions in a certain way towards treatment of diseases, towards better health or something like this. Just another example. There's evidence that the production of reactive oxygen species, which is that thing. So reactive oxygen species is that thing that if you have too much, it's bad for you. And some people take antioxidants to counter that. Whether that's good or not, I don't know. But that's if you have too many of those reactive oxygen species, it's bad for you. There's evidence that the production of those reactive oxygen species is affected by magnetic fields in a way that is consistent with it being dependent on this quantum property of spin. So can we, in the future, apply magnetic fields that counter that towards, say, if you have an injury, you apply a local magnetic field and you sort of drive something local, some chemical reaction locally there towards like healing or something like this. Again, this has nothing to do with like, what's that?
No, please go ahead. I was just trying to prompt what you're saying. It's probably nothing to do with what the experiments that are happening right now, but it is a likelihood in the future.
Yes, and it has nothing to do with like this new agey quantum healing. That's it's not the new agey stuff, but it's like it's something that is real. I mean, it's not done right now, but maybe in 50 years we will know how to deterministically turn those quantum knobs and use those.
And I have a question on the magnetic fields that
Yes.
are so part of this whole process. So here, we are talking about very low magnetic fields as being more significant than higher magnetic fields, right?
Yes, for
Could you
reasons that I
elaborate
won't.
on that? Yeah, yeah.
Yes, so for reasons that I won't have time to explain, those chemical reactions that depend on spin, right? Those mostly only occur at low field. So what I'm talking about is very different from what's happening, say, in a magnetic resonance imaging machine, right? Where you have those extremely high fields. If you put such spin-dependent chemical reactions inside a magnetic resonance imaging machine, the big magnetic field is not going to influence, to be able to change the equilibrium of the chemical reaction, which makes it all so what we where we study those phenomena are thus in low magnetic fields, which is sort of crazy, right? So because if you, again, seriously, if you think about it, we're surrounded by things that emit relatively low magnetic fields, right? I think that there needs to be a study, a systematic study about what can those be doing to us in the long term.
Yeah.
Right.
So this whole conversation around, hey, the field is not high enough to impact you is completely wrong, isn't it? It's about,
Yes.
hey, is it low enough to impact your cellular structure in any way? That's the conversation we need to be having, isn't it?
Yes. And I think that for each particular chemical reaction, there might be a sweet spot in the field. For example, one can make predictions of where we expect the sensitivity to magnetic fields. For example, in the very beginning of our call, I mentioned this protein called a cryptochrome, which is the protein that is putatively related to how birds sense the magnetic field of the Earth. You can model like the spin physics of this molecule, and there's people who do this for a living, but even myself as an experimentalist, I can also do like crappy simulations, which are basically just the same type of simulations that people from quantum computing do, except that my quantum objects live in a biological matter, right? So we can do simulations and we can make predictions. And this is just one of the predictions that I made and other people made too. And I'm dying to take this data experimentally to see if the data agrees with the prediction or not. But if you plot the predicted magnetosensitivity of cryptochrome, that is how sensitive it is to how well it interacts with magnetic fields as a function of magnetic field strengths, right? The first thing that you see in this theoretical prediction is that this curve is not monotonic, it goes up and down. At about 10 times the magnetic field of the Earth, the curve, like the magnetosensitivity, is almost zero. Again, for reasons that I can't explain, we know why that is, but this proves, I mean, it corroborates the idea that this is a low magnetic field phenomena. And very interestingly, the place where this curve peaks is very close to the magnetic field of the Earth, which might be a coincidence, or it might be that this protein evolved to work best in the magnetic field where it was immersed. I mean, I don't think that we in our group can choose between coincidence or pressure under evolution, but we think that people who do something called a directed evolution of proteins, they could help us, for example, see if there is there was some sort of evolutionary pressure for this protein to evolve in the way that it did.
Yeah, and with all those cell phones around, with certain frequencies and certain kind of fields surrounding us now, there could be other evolutionary pressures that could be impacting the long term, right? So
yes, and I think that so again, cryptochrome is one of the most well studied proteins that can sustain spin-dependent chemical reactions historically because of the birds. But there's way more than this. There's evidence that many other proteins can also sustain magnetic field dependent or spin dependent chemical reactions. And my prediction is that each one will have a sweet spot of magnetic field sensitivity that might have to do with how they work or how might them work. Again, they're all expected. I think they're mostly expected to be sensitive to magnetic fields at low field strength, right? And another thing that I didn't mention is that the model per se predicts that there is a dependency on the magnetic field strength, frequency, and direction. So yes, messing up with the frequency of electromagnetic fields might also screw things up at a cellular level, right? So
yeah, so I think what I'm sort of carrying away from this discussion is that not only do physicists need to focus on this from the impact that it can have on quantum computing, in terms of solving the error correction problem, which is the holy grail, right now, right? For computing.
Yes.
But there is a great opportunity for the biosciences industry, people who are responsible, looking at life sciences solutions, drug discovery, and especially about people who are focusing on human longevity and why do people grow old and what is the impact of different kinds of fields. Understanding that might give them a head start in a completely different direction, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. So what we study, in other words, people with a quantum background might understand what I mean. In quantum physics, we talk about light-matter interaction, which is like how atoms interact with electromagnetic fields. Here, it's all about light-matter interactions, where matter is biological matter, right? Mm-hmm. And things in biology, mostly like in the West, actually, electromagnetics in biology sort of became a taboo in the West. Mainly, it's still strong in Japan, in Russia, in China, but in the West it became a taboo. And people in biology have been relying on purely chemical reactions for many decades. So when I start talking about electromagnetic fields in biology and stuff, people are like, why do we need electromagnetic fields? We've been doing things successfully chemically, right?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm just loving this discussion. There is, there are insights being drawn as we talk, right? So, I mean, it cannot get better than that. And, we've talked about physics, biology, and chemistry, and we've, sort of expanded to biosciences, and we looked at the scope that this could be. Are there any other fields that come to mind which you think might benefit from this, delving a little deeper into this topic? I don't want to put you on the spot. We already discussed quite a few areas.
Yeah, right. I mean, let me reverse sort of I think we could get help from people from like computer science, right? I'm sure that there are insights that could be obtained by using some sort of machine learning method applied to biology or to quantumness in biology. I don't know. Those things are super broad. Let me talk about something else. I'll talk about engineering, and I will have to talk about a phenomenon that is super new, that has been discovered in 2011 in DNA. And now it's very interesting because now people are making nanomaterials that have this property. So, and this is something where, say, material science people could benefit from thinking about quantum bios. So here's what was discovered in DNA. It was discovered that when an electron is transported through a nanochiral material, a material that has chiral symmetry, such as a helix, right? And when this material is tiny, such a DNA helix, it turns out that when there's electron transport, electrons with a certain spin, say spin up, prefer to be transported in one direction, and electrons with the opposite spin, say spin down, prefer to be transported in the other direction. So if you push a current through DNA and then spin analyze the electrons spit out by this molecule on the other side, because the difference between at room temperature, because the energy difference between spin up and spin down at room temperature is so small, you would expect more or less a 50% population of electrons down and 50% of electrons with spin up. But that's not what people are seeing. People are seeing spin imbalances or spin polarizations of like 60% to 40%. And now people are starting to make materials that have spin imbalances like 10%, 90%, 95.5. And it's really crazy because nature has found a way to produce those spin polarized currents. Okay, and those spin polarized currents have a lot of applications in spintronics, maybe even in quantum information processing or transferring of quantum information. So I think, again, there's a lot for us to learn with nature, right?
Sure. That's a great example. Thank you so much for that. In fact, one of the questions that now I had is, one of the things I noticed when we were talking was that you were very cautious about qualifying and saying, hey, this is something which is in the realm of evidence versus proof, right? So evidence is you have a few instances and proof is where it is conclusively proven, right? So I think you're being very careful about the nuances of this. On the other hand, the trend that I'm seeing about reporting on science, right, is that, there is a tendency to a lot of articles from very reputed, what was earlier considered very reputed magazines or online sites are now sensationalizing some of the headings. And what are your thoughts on that, And then, quite a few examples I've seen lately, and it's very, very distressing in certain scenarios.
It is, right? Oh, I think this is a long conversation, but first of all, I totally agree that sometimes the most prestigious magazines, they tend to sensationalize the things that they publish, and they tend to look for those things. And I know that sometimes those findings are not even reproducible, but they're published because they're flashy, right? This is a problem, and this has to do with the publishing industry. Mm-hmm. The other problem is researchers themselves trying to hyper their science, which is also a necessity because that's how
funding
they get that. It's a big catch-22, all of this, right? I wasn't going to mention it, but I will. Have you heard of the tardigrade paper?
Yes. Yes, I read it, and I was, I had questions on it because I don't I'm not, quantum has so many areas, and, there are so many things that I will admit I do not know. So I had questions. I don't want to, when I look at a paper like that, and I don't want to completely dismiss anything because I'm telling myself, hey, maybe I don't understand some part of this. So I need more corroboration from other people who do.
So audience, if you're there, just Google like the tardigrade quantum paper. So the people involved in that paper are absolutely serious. They're serious. They do good science, right? And I think that they chose to advertise their paper in a way that was super catchy, and that I don't think that supported by the claims that they make. But again, now everyone is talking about the tardigrade paper, right? For better or for worse.
So because because the concept that they talked about, at least in the heading, if you go into the details of the paper, it's all fine. But if you look at the heading, your immediate correlation is to Star Trek Discovery, and the tardigrade that is used to, can survive across dimensions, across space, and all of that. And populars, it sort of immediately caught on to that, right? I mean, people sort of correlated it with some science fiction, which was very popular. And they started looking at it from that perspective, but the paper is about something completely different, right? So so there's a paper on quantum. I think this was a couple of years ago, and there was a paper which said scientists managed to go back in time 2 seconds or something like that. God. And actually, what happened was that there was an experiment which sort of yielded an equation which had a negative value to time. Mathematically, right?
Oh my God!
And that's how that got interpreted in popular media, or not even popular. Right. The borderline scientific popular media, so to say. And that's also something like that is scary, not because it harms just the scientific community. I think it has. To me, as somebody who's part of a think tank and is running a think tank on quantum. And the attempt is to advise policymakers and decision makers. Something like that worries me because, when you say something like that, it suddenly becomes too important, more important than it should be. And then suddenly there are chances of clamping down of boundaries, less sharing of information because it's a very difficult technology. Hey, what can you do if you can go back in time, blah, blah, blah. And so and every decision maker and policy maker out there is not a quantum expert, right? And they just, as it is, quantum seems like such a weird technology. It looks like there's something strange happening out there for somebody who doesn't understand the subject. And so how do they differentiate between all this actual scientific stuff versus the hype and the reason I worry is I don't want people taking wrong decisions, which reduces collaborative efforts around the world. There should be more sharing of information happening so that the fields can progress faster. And, so I'm totally with you on that. Yeah.
And I think that it's important to say that the hype is not only from people in marginalized fields like quantum biology, right? So I am sure that even in the main quantum computing industry, there are many hyped up things.
Whatever I described to you is from the main quantum. It's not from the marginalized field at all. Not a comment on the marginalized fields.
It's everywhere, right? It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
And it's there to serve a purpose. And this purpose is probably to attract more funding, either from private investors or from it's a crazy system, right? It's a bad feedback system,
right? Yeah. Okay. But something for people to watch out for and seek more clarity and clarifications in such scenarios, I guess. So what is the message we could give to the media for this?
I'm not sure the message should go to the media. I think the message should go to the people, the funding agencies, maybe, or I'm not sure.
I mean, there are different scenarios. In the tardigrade case, the title itself was hyped up, but the case that I talked to you about, the title was not hyped up. It was the media who ran away with the interpretation, and sometimes when people like you say that this is just evidence, but it's not proof. They decide to ignore that, right? And sort of just run away with it. You know what I'm saying? So there probably needs to be a message for everybody. Like funding agencies, I think it's important that they understand.
Well,
and then
maybe there's a way for the scientists themselves to be on the lookout. It's hard, right? To be on the lookout and try to correct that. It's hard. I don't know, because in the media, maybe the people who wrote that maybe they weren't even trying to hype it up. It's maybe that they didn't have the background. I don't know. So
maybe they just understood it like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I guess all of them can do cross checks. The message I would see is that all three entities, the funding agencies, the scientists who are involved in doing this cutting edge work, and the people who start talking about it need to sort of create processes that send the right messages out there. Now I'm going to ask. We've discussed really serious stuff, all actually technical, scientific stuff. I'm going to move away, and for the benefit of the audience, I'm saying it very clearly. We are moving into a little bit of La La Land and going to talk about science fiction and see, have some fun with that. So I was recently reading this book called The Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, and he writes really good science fiction. Wrote The Martian, and it's a pretty interesting story. And he talks in this story, and this is a spoiler alert, there is a mention of an entity called astrophage, which is supposed to be a biological entity. And it's an organism that gets detected in the book, in space somewhere. I don't want to give away too many details. And it eats energy at a very fantastic rate. So a very small organism can store a very huge amount of energy, right? And then it's linked to its microscopic properties. And when I was, reading that, I was like, hey, is it possible? And, the advantage of science fiction is that it lets your imagination run wild.
Yeah.
So my imagination was running wild when I was reading this, and I was thinking, hey, does quantum biology have a way of explaining whether organisms of this kind can exist? You talked about the spin radiation for materials. Can spin variations of some form, sort of allow organisms of different kinds to exist with different kind of entropy and energy related properties and so on and so forth. So again, again, within quotes, we are right now just speculating, no scientific basis here, just science fiction discussion. Yes.
So actually, I'm going to speculate and tell you something that people are actually thinking about. I do not know. I was thinking, how might I respond? I right now do not know whether quantum biology could help identify this type of organism. But let me tell you something that people are actually doing, right?
Okay.
So people are looking at a light from distant stars, and they're trying to, from the light that the stars are emitting, trying to see what sort, if there were, say, photosynthetic organisms in those stars, given the available light, what would that photosynthetic organism, how would it work, and how would it be different from Earth's?
Mm-hmm.
So this is one way that people are actually trying to use astronomical observations to model photosynthesis and actually to model some quantum aspects of photosynthesis. So this is being done, and it's so cool. It's like looking at space and using the spectrum, try to infer whether there might be photosynthetic things in those stars and like planets orbiting around the star, and if so, what should that look like? And that's super cool. The other thing that I think is very cool has to do with spin physics, right? So, and this has to do with the experiment that a friend of mine from Munich did. So this friend of mine is called Peter Fierlinger. He's a professor at the Technical University of Munich, and he's like a bona fide precision measurement physicist. So for a living, what he does is he builds hypomagnetic chambers, which are basically very good Faraday cages, where in the inside you shield extremely well any external magnetic fields. So the magnetic field of the Earth in magnitude in Tesla, it's about 50 microtesla, which is already super, super small. But his noise level inside those chambers is about nanotesla. Okay, oh, wow. So he was hearing stuff about electromagnetic fields in biology and stuff. So what he decided to do was for 2 days, which was as long as he could do it without asking for a bio permit, he decided to grow tadpoles, frog embryos inside those chambers. So he did this under two conditions. One, with just the nanotesla residual field, and two, with inside a magnetic field that mimicked the magnetic field of the Earth, again, which is super, super tiny.
Mm-hmm.
What he saw, and this experiment has now been independently proven to yield this, it's not published yet, but the results are sort of consistent with his group and two other groups. What he saw was that the tadpoles, after 2 days in the box with the mimicked magnetic field, they were macroscopically okay, whereas the tadpoles in the nanotesla field, 30%, 1/3, were macroscopically deformed.
Oh.
And unclear if they were viable or not, because they needed to stop the experiment. And this is crazy because you didn't apply a field, you just removed a tiny field, right? Macroscopically, just by looking at it, you cannot say whether this is in physics, but given the fact that it's such a minute field and you're just removing it, everyone's best guess is that this is spin related. Yeah. Which brings us to all sorts of questions, right? For example, and let us bring us back to space. What's the magnetic field on Mars? Can we grow lettuce in Mars? Can we reproduce in Mars? When astronauts are flying like multi-generational missions, what's the magnetic field that they are subject to? Right.
A deformed embryo means that cell development was not happening, cell generation was not happening in the right manner, and so what happens to not just small things like how do injuries get treated, but even big things like do you develop cancer more easily, and what happens? Do no mutations happen?
Yes,
which
exactly.
And the whole conversation is about radiation, not about magnetic fields, right? So
yes.
Yeah.
No, that's important. Magnetic fields are crazily important and way more important than just birds. I think that the conversation has even been stifled a little bit by the bird story, which is important, but it's a very tiny part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
this is great. We have actually crossed the time. It's been such an interesting discussion. I just wanted to ask you one last question.
Yes.
So through this podcast series, I'm actually trying to bring more complex topics like quantum biology to a larger set of audience. I will not pretend that anybody who doesn't understand science will be able to understand these podcasts, but the aim is still to get a larger audience. Anybody who has some idea of science can make some aspects of what the conversation is all about. So what do you think about this effort, and what would you recommend for me?
I think it's awesome. And I think that we all need to be doing what you're doing and keeping curious, right? It's super important for us to keep curious and keep learning new things, not necessarily in the fields that we're trained, exactly because we start making connections that other people might miss because they don't have the same training. So I think it's awesome what we're doing. Because of my nascent bio interest, I am very interested in how can we programmatically build a cell, right? Like, what are the boundaries between like really engineering and biology? If we were to build a cell from scratch, how would we go about it? This, I think, would be this would be sort of a podcast that I would really, it would really be interesting for me too.
So I would have to get so I take the challenge. What I will need to do is to do a little bit of preparation and get a set of people on the call.
I can give you some names. I can give you some names, but definitely, I think that there are many people, again, trained in both biology and engineering who are talking together. Again, it all goes towards that thing that I think that the big challenges in science in the very near future will have to be tackled by people from different disciplines.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm with you on that. And thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure, this discussion. Very, very energizing, very, very interesting, very new inferences, I'm sure, for people who are listening. And my message to everyone is that please go ahead and even if you watch this later, because this is going to be available on the YouTube channel. And if you have questions, please drop those questions to me directly, or post them on YouTube, and we'll get back to you. I'll speak to Dr. Clarice D Aiello, and we'll get back. Yeah.
I have an urgent comment. Sorry, it's super late, but if you're interested in quantum bio, there's a book I recommend. It's called Life on the Edge. It sort of goes through the poster children for the different flavors of quantum bio. They have been written by the people, a theoretical physicist and a biologist who actually run the Surrey Quantum Biology Doctoral Training Center. It's a very good book. It gives an introduction to a lot of things that we were talking about, and it's a very fun book to read. So Life on the Edge.
Yeah, and I'm going to be reading it as well. Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye. Have a good weekend, everyone. Bye. Thanks, Dr. Aiello.
Thank you, Reena, for having me. Bye.